Everfall, a land of wonder and strife, light and darkness. Its skies are filled with wondrous flying machines, while lurking in the dark corners of the realm is the ever-looming threat of the Shade. With the terrible Conqueror dethroned, the realm shows signs of stability, though may not be enough to stave off the impending darkness. For the Archknights, defenders of the realm and servants to the light, are few in number. What shall then become of the realm?
Iron Emissary here with a spoiler-free review of Shadow of the Conqueror, written and published by Shad Brooks in July of 2019. I listened to the audiobook version of the book, which is very well done considering it's narrated by Michael Kramer and Kate Reading. If you've ever listened to some of Brandon Sanderson's stuff, a lot of it's narrated by Michael Kramer and he does a really good job. So I was super pleased when I heard his voice when I booted up the book. So let's go ahead and jump into it here. I was fully expecting a generic fantasy story when I started Shadow of the Conqueror, but I was pleasantly surprised by the novel. It's a well-paced, character-driven story with some surprises along the way. I liked it so much that I'll be getting a physical copy of it for my shelf. Now, to begin the review, I am going to start with a vague plot synopsis. I do not want to spoil anything. I'm even going to give less spoiler information than the back of the novel itself has, because that's the way I stepped into reading the book, and I thought it was worthwhile. Plot synopsis, go. The story follows Dalen, a young man with a more than interesting past that the plot plays with a good deal. Really, one of the central through lines of the plot is Dalen coming to grips with his all-too-checkered past. But that's enough about that. Through a series of events, Dalen gains this ability called light binding. Light binding is essentially an ability that allows the wielder to augment features of themselves by drawing on light as a source of power. After Dalen gains his newfound powers, the plot powers forward at a satisfying pace as Dalen encounters interesting characters on a swashbuckling adventure to confront his past. Now, after hearing that, you might be thinking to yourself, wow, that sounds like an incredibly generic fantasy plot. And let me tell you, on paper, that is an incredibly generic fantasy plot. However, don't let that or the run-of-the-mill cover art throw you off, because ladies and gentlemen, Shadow of the Conqueror is more than meets the eye. First and foremost, the characters are well written. I was always interested to learn more about each of the characters and their backgrounds. The characters weren't only likable and interesting on the surface. They were well fleshed out. You could really get a sense of why the characters made the decisions that they made, even if those decisions were rather drastic. Here's an instance where a character makes a rather drastic decision towards the end of the novel, and it caught me totally off guard. But when all the cards fell into place, it made sense because I had a sense for who the characters were, what they cared about, and what their convictions are. At the end of the day, when this drastic situation came up, I was rendered on the edge of my seat until the conclusion of said event. Again, no spoilers. Dalen is interesting enough, but I found the supporting cast great, honestly. One of my favorite characters, Ahakarin, when you first meet him in the novel, I hated him. I thought he was going to be dumb, he tells some dad jokes, and he seemed a little one-dimensional. However, by the end of the novel, Ahakarin was one of my favorite characters. So, yeah, it's The characters are well done. I do think that if you don't fall in love with the characters, then you might not like the book. However, I fell in love with the characters, and I very much enjoyed the book. Enough about the characters. Another thing I very much enjoyed about Shadow of the Conqueror is the pacing. The story kept chugging along at a punchy pace. Nothing seemed to overstay its welcome, really. Now, the author does take time to talk about the intricacies of how some of the fantasy bits of the world work, but I was never bored by the lengthy explanations, as they were interesting, and they gave me a sense for how the world works. But again, none of these things I felt like overstayed their welcome. Now, the plot itself seemed to be a little bit more episodic in a sense. Dalen goes on several adventures throughout the novel, with the only through line being the threads that connect all the characters to each other, as well as Dalen's past. So the pacing is less so of a novel, or your typical like fantasy novel, and more so of, say, a graphic novel. Kind of shorter stories bleeding into this larger story type of situation. Now, Shad is turning Shadow of the Conqueror into a graphic novel series as well. We'll talk about that towards the end of the video. But yeah, not your typical fantasy plot. Very punchy. I liked it. Now let's talk about the writing. The style of writing was, I thought, rather unorthodox for the genre. And, okay, I would describe the style of writing as rather plain, in my opinion. Though, I thought that served the pacing of the story as well as the tone of the setting. Let me explain that word salad that I just gave you. Modern fantasy, more often than not, is filled with fanciful or flowery language. Now, that style of writing is great when it serves the purpose of the story. Fantasy, after all, invites the reader into a world unlike our own, and often resembling medieval Europe. But if the flowery phrases and descriptions are used merely for the sake of using them, the story inevitably suffers. At the start of the novel, I wasn't the biggest fan of the author's style of writing. Like I said, I thought it was rather plain. But as the story progressed, I thought the author's use of language was charming and to the point. It conveyed a sense of realism that it seemed like Shad wanted to communicate to the reader. It also helped me relate to the characters as well as flesh out the realism or the gritty nature of the world. The characters felt real, and the world felt appropriately gritty. Not a writing style for everyone. Again, plain, kind of conversational, kind of talking like you would talk to people at work. When you talk to people at work, you don't say, "Bequeath unto me thine fax copy of said Excel document," or whatever, you know. But anyways, you get what I'm saying. Not a writing style for everyone, but effective nonetheless. There are some very mature themes in Shadow of the Conqueror. Some of them are rather dark. Honestly, the darkest of the dark. I really appreciated how the author handles these dark things in his novel. You see, oftentimes, authors' use of dark material in their stories, more often than not, is edginess for the purpose of shock value or to ascribe a quick, cheap emotion to a situation. In Shadow of the Conqueror, I thought the author's use of dark subject matter was used in boon to the story itself. I never felt like the book was trying to be edgy with the unsavory bits of material, but to communicate feelings of characters and add weight, purpose, and motive to them. A good litmus test to controversial subject matter in books like these is if you take out those unsavory elements, if the story doesn't suffer, or the theme or tone of the book doesn't suffer, then maybe the author didn't use them very well. I believe that the unsavory bits in Shadow of the Conqueror add to the story in several different ways. So overall, Shadow of the Conqueror is an exciting character-driven story in a compelling fantasy world that left me wanting more. The themes of redemption and purpose throughout the novel were strong and effective, making it a great book recommendation for someone who might be a little down on themselves. I give it the Iron Emissary seal of approval. You can get Shadows of the Conqueror on Amazon. Like I said, I purchased the audiobook edition, which is really good. I really recommend the audiobook edition. It's awesome. I don't think he gets as much money from the audiobook edition, to my understanding, for how Audible works. So if you want to support the author, I recommend purchasing the book off of Amazon. You can keep up with the author himself on his YouTube channel, Shadiversity, where he likes to, talk about swords. This guy likes to talk about swords a lot. What can I say? He likes to talk about swords and books and things like that. Also, I mentioned earlier that he's coming out with a graphic novel, which I'm super excited about because, I mean, look at this art. The graphic novel is not out yet. Looks like this Indiegogo campaign for the graphic novel is past, so I don't know exactly when it's coming out, I'm not gonna lie. But look at these panels. They are beautiful. Look at that. Look at this. Look at that right there. The artist that he got did some of the Injustice comic stuff. The dude's been in the industry for like 30 years. And man, if these sample panels are anything like the graphic novel, I'm super stoked for them. But yeah, stay tuned. I recommend the book. Get the book, support the creator, and Iron Emissary out.